So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I figured it was about time we took a trip to one of the more established maps in the Third Age world. Obviously OSGILIATH has been a part of the game for quite a long time at this point, and not only does that mean it's tried and tested, and obviously that means that some of the assets are not going to cause some of the technical glitches that I've been experiencing recently, but also it's good to come to one of these locations, again one of the more established features of Middle-earth, to get one of those nice iconic battles. And I do believe it is in fact a good versus evil, where the Gondorians are going to be on the defense and it's going to be all evil factions on the attack. So let's see if Gondor can hold on to the former jewel in their crown here, sitting astride the mighty Anduin. Osgiliath is a map we've all seen before. It's fairly difficult to defend, especially the ruined version, and that obviously comes down to the fact that the attackers can more easily use their own archers to shoot into the settlement. This does mean that they can perhaps skimp a little bit more on infantry than they otherwise could. That is the temptation if you're on the attacking side. I've fallen prey to that myself actually before. But it's still more of a problem for the defenders than it is the attackers, obviously. Especially with this setup, because the attackers have most certainly done the wisest thing here, and 3 armies are going to be attacking from this side, and only 2 are going to be attacking by the side where they are bottlenecked into more of a choke point. So it'll be interesting to see how the defenders react to that. It is going to be all on them really, to see if they can really pull this victory out of the bag. We'll go through the attackers first of all, and we'll start off with the player who sent me the battle replay, which is RH Stewed Balrog, who's going to be playing as Mordor today, so leading the assault, taking Sauron's banner into battle. He's got some Minas Morgul chosen here at the front. I'm going to try and go through the compositions a little bit faster based on the scale of this particular battle. The Minas Morgul chosen, good heavy spears, upper end spears that Mordor have available to them. Not the best in terms of damage dealing like a few other high tier spears, but they can certainly make a decent centre to what is otherwise a fairly fragile core of orc units. They really get their durability from just their sheer numbers more than their individual prowess. We have some orc fodder pushing up a ram. Of course, they're going to be completely unopposed getting into this side of the city, though Gondor are going to have to consolidate their forces. The Nazgul are in and amongst them, however, one of the tools that Mordor can use at their disposal, and often, by the time you realise what damage they're causing the Nazgul in the middle of an infantry fight, it can often be too late to stop them from getting good cost efficiency throughout the entire battle. A very tricky unit to deal with, actually, the Nazgul. Mordor perhaps lacks some of the fancier options that Angmar have overall, but they certainly have the odd unit in their roster which can be a real problem. We have a lot of morale on infantry as well, which is unsurprising. The attackers do need to leverage a lot of their numbers here. They are the evil factions after all, and it's more easy to do that when you are playing as evil factions. And certainly here against Gondor, you can also leverage a lot of cheap AP. The morale on halberds can kind of count themselves among that. They're not as cheap as some of the cheap axemen, but they can still be very useful with that phalanx formation and of course the armour-piercing attacks that halberds get. Another very useful unit that Mordor have at their disposal is the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Obviously with their great shields they can push through the lines. We've seen more so in 0.97 however that this is more difficult to do. If you're too early with your push, it will be stopped dead in its tracks by a well organised defence. Excuse me. I really hope my voice holds up for the duration of this battle. We'll see how well the Blackguard also do against the Gondorian defence. The Mighty Temple Execution is obviously a really strong heavy swordsman. Very little can go toe-to-toe with them one-on-one and come out victorious. I would say only the Noldorin Blade Masters are guaranteed of that. Possibly the Pharazim Sword Masters as well. Troll Catapult, better than an average catapult obviously, because they're much better in melee and they're also much faster at pushing the artillery around, which is honestly, in my opinion, even more useful than having the trolls in melee. It's a really underrated aspect to it, I think. We also have here actually an interesting sort of custom unit model for that one, Lumpy Orc, which is in the Siege of Minas Tirith, but also the General's Bodyguard, the Bulldogs of Durthang. Oh boy, my voice really is suffering already, that's not a good sign. But the Bulldogs are an armour-piercing infantry unit, which they may use swords, but they are AP, which is what's nice. Orc Javelins, cheap Javelins, really, really effective. And obviously the Olag High as well, really, really nice to have as Mordor. Some of the best, if not the best, trolls in the entire game. And then joining them, over on this side of things, we actually have another Orc faction, I should say, in Irish Gunner, who's going to be playing as the Witch Realm of Angmar. So he has some Barrow Wights, which of course are going to be useful. The Barrow Wights are just really useful to just sort of gum up the works of the defences, really get in the way. And it can be very difficult to deal with the Barrow Wights efficiently. They're not as strong as they used to be, certainly, but that is definitely a good thing. They were too powerful in 0.96. They were almost impossible to get rid of. We have some Guardians of Khand Dûm with their rusted armour. We have the Orc Fellas. I'm a little bit surprised we didn't see Orc Maulers from Mordor a little bit more so, because this is the kind of unit which can be very useful against Gondor, because AP is always going to be useful. They have very few units which don't have high armour values. I think really the Rangers are the only 2 units they have which don't necessarily pack on the armour outside of their militia and possibly the Pelagia Marines as well. But AP going to be very useful for dealing with the Gondorian infantry. Witcher on Pikemen, obviously nice for that extra range. Blackwatch Legion, good for the same reasons that the Black Legion are. More Guardians of Kharndoom out there. The Witchers obviously are always going to be a factor in a map like this if they are brought, but they could be vulnerable to the many and plentiful Gondorian archers. Trolls of Gundabad over here as well. We have some Angmar Marauders to pad out the numbers a little bit, as well as some Gundabad Guard. I like the inclusion of some of these lower tier units to give them some more numbers, and some Goblin Band here at the back, and then maybe, yeah, there's some Snaga Stalkers in there as well. Possibly some Snaga Archers and Goblin Trackers hidden around the place also. Then we have Vendel, who's going to be playing as a Rune. He has got some Scion Rim and some Flag Rim. Scion Rim, very tough to kill. They're not AP like the other Loka units are, but I really do approve of their inclusion here, even against Gondor, because they can stand up to pressure much better than most of the other units in the Runic line. The Flag Rim are decent at withstanding pressure, but really the reason you bring them is because of their AP damage, which will be very useful against Gondor, it must be said. Rune in general have a lot of good AP options, which should be good in this particular matchup. Variag Mercenaries will be good to just sort of skirmish into the settlement, and considering the side of the map they're on, that's a very good thing that they brought them. Some Eastron Warriors who will be absolutely picked apart by Gondorian archers if they move forward unsupported, because they are unshielded and not particularly well armoured, but pretty decent in melee with their dual swords for what they cost. Variag Mercenaries over here, some Narim, so yeah, more archers, which is not necessarily a bad way of doing things for Rune here. We have some Gamprim as well, lots of Gamprim. Some Inas Rim actually, which is an interesting choice, so they're maybe thinking that Gondorians could sally out, and maybe they have something to meet that. I'm not seeing any crossbows. I saw some Camel shadow bows in there, which is a good inclusion, but no crossbows, which is interesting. Refreshing in a way. We also have Killeen, who's going to be playing as another Mordor army, and I would imagine it's fairly similar here. Moran on infantry, Orc fodder. Let's see if he's got any different units. That's more Moran on infantry, more Orc fodder, so a second unit of Orc fodder. He has gone for some Orc archers, so cheap archers over on this side for the reasons I've said. Very good choice on OSGILIATH. Moran on guard, so actually just the standard Moran on spears, as well as, I think I saw, well, that's next to them actually, but the Moran on guard is sort of the standard Moran on spears. Obviously the damage they do is incredibly limited, but still, more numbers on the front line, as well as a shield wall formation. Sauron's Will is always nice as well for the AP that they offer. Nazgul, but apart from that, very similar to his contemporary on the other side of the river, except his Temple Executioners also have an armour upgrade, making them even more powerful. And then the final attacking army, we have Ricky Beagle, who's going to be playing as Umbar. Ricky Beagle, unless I'm very much mistaken, has almost always played as Mordor when I've shown his battle replays on the channel, so this time he's going to be playing as Umbar, which is nice. He's got some Balaketh Marksman, very good archer for skirmishing with the enemy with, and that's exactly what they can use to good effect here. Corsair Infantry can also skirmish with the enemy, albeit for a very limited amount of time with their limited ammunition, but of course they make good light infantry as well, especially with the armour upgrades they have. Alcarondas Legion are in here, some Balaketh Axe Guard who actually do have the armour upgrade, which is nice to see. A Dunaim Shield Guard, very strong Numenorian Spears, Balaketh Shield Bearers, so he's gone for mostly a lot of high quality on the front line, but also interspersed with a few lower end units just to try and make the numbers pad out a little bit. Corsair Fencers, and then of course the Mighty Harbingers of Castamere as well. More Shield Bearers back there, but most of this Umbar army is more quality infantry focus, which I think is good. It offsets the skirmish focus of Rune on the other side, and the more numbers heavy approach that his Mordor ally just to his right has taken. Now we'll go over the defenders real quick, because obviously all the armies are going to be mashed together. We have MSQ, one of the Gondorians. He's got some Citadel Guard. The AP will be incredibly useful against every attacking faction, to be honest with you. Slightly less so maybe for Rune, but obviously, you know, even so, Citadel Guard, very, very good unit of all-purpose spears, and in this situation they'll be invaluable. We have the Axemen of the Sarnak with the armour upgrade as well. Just the first level of armour upgrade though, not both. But even with just the single level of armour upgrade, they'll be able to do a lot of damage to the heavily armoured attackers if they're used right. We've seen them do really well actually recently. Warns of the White Tower, I feel as though they've kind of had their thunder stolen by the Royal Legion of Armenelos a little bit, but they can still do a very good job on the front line. Pelagia Marines are going to be very important for bombarding the enemy with those Javies. Marksmen of Caer-Andros are going to almost immediately actually be in range of Mordor. More Gondor archers over here. No armour upgrade on them though. Some Vanguard of King Elisar are really strong heavy swordsmen as well in their own right. Maybe not quite, no, definitely not quite as good as the Temple Executioners, but still one of the heavyweights. Guards of Osgiliath, a couple of units of them. More Fountain Guard. We have some Citadel Guard actually from Rastlin, the second defending army. We've also got some Ravenhelm, some Nimlothian Honour Guard as well. More Nimlothian Honour Guard from MSQ. A little bit further back, he's got some more Axemen of Lasarnak, some more Fountain Guard. So obviously the Gondorian armies are all going to be of pretty high quality here. Ravenhelm, some veterans of Osgiliath with the first level of armour upgrade, so they've got kind of the mismatched plate. They're fighting on their home turf, so if that doesn't inspire them to greater heights, nothing will. We also have some Mithrandir's retinue here, played by Lalan1230. So they could sally out, but I think most of the attackers are kind of prepared for that. Maybe not Rune though. Maybe not as much as they could be. Vanguard of King Elisar over there. It's a lot of archers to try and cover after all. Some Gondor infantry, some guards of Osgiliath, more Gondorian infantry, Fountain Guard, Wardens, Fountain Guard, lots of Fountain Guard, including the Gondorian defence here. They'll be relying on them to do a lot of damage for them. Pelargir Marines, the ones at Minas Ithil, which is pretty neat to see these guys, to be honest with you, because you don't see them an awful lot, because the DPS of a lower man count unit of Rangers is significantly lower than the standard Athelian Rangers, and they're even more expensive, so... But it's still neat to see them. I mean, if you've gone for 2 units, you can go for 2 units of Rangers as Gondor, is what this unit offers you. Some Pinnith-Galen cavalry out in the distance over there, some Athelian Rangers, some marksmen, more infantry, more Nimlothians, more Citadel Guard, more marksmen, pretty much everything you would expect here. Pelargir Marines, veterans again, Gondor infantry and guards of Osgiliath, as well as some Fountain Guard and some more Wardens. And finally some Pelargir Marines and Citadel Guard. Not really any Gondor Spears, standard Gondor Spears. That's the only omission I'm slightly surprised by, because they're so affordable and easy to field, and they do offer you that shield wall. But when you have this many this much in the way of Florins, I suppose, lots of Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard are going to be on the menu rather than the standard Spears. But without further ado, let's begin. I'll be interested to see the first phases of this fight, because I would imagine what I would do if I was sort of directing the attackers here would be to get them to go in and just try and skirmish with Gondor. Like, they wouldn't win the skirmish fight, but they would absorb a lot of the ammunition that units like the Marksmen of Caer Andros and the Veterans of Osgiliath would have, which will really spare a lot of the manpower from their infantry later on. And if it comes down to just sheer numbers and sheer brute force, the Gondorians will not win this. But if the Gondorians are able to keep their front lines solid with their quality infantry, and then support that with a combination of their javelins and their very strong archers, I feel as though they could be onto a winner here. But a lot of that is going to be dictated with how the attackers choose to approach this battle. Rune over here will set the pace fairly early on, actually, I think, because Rune have got a lot of archers, which they can use, but they also have a lot of unshielded infantry, and if they lead the way in the vanguard with units like the Eastron Warriors, they're going to throw away a lot of the infantry that they do have unnecessarily into the teeth of the Gondorian skirmishers. Speaking of the Gondorians, however, they do have their own expeditionary forces they can send out, and the Pinnith-Galen cavalry are good lancers. They are lancers of good quality. Good charge on them, pretty resilient as well with their armour and their shields. They can stand up to a decent amount of missile fire. You can see there the Moran on Guard. Well, the Mordor army as a whole being bombarded from the Gondorian archer companies up on the walls. Here you can see immediately the Pinnith-Galen cavalry are going to charge into this huge mass of Mordor troops. And Mordor are going to have to sort themselves out a little bit here, because they're going to be taking unnecessary losses to this sort of thing. It's nothing too devastating just yet, but you can see there that even with not necessarily the best of charges, the Pinnith-Galen cavalry was still able to inflict a pretty decent amount of casualties there on the Morannon infantry, and as if that wasn't enough, the entire Mordor army is also being peppered down with those archers up on top of the walls. Another charge coming in here, and Mordor kind of need to meet this charge more so than they're doing. They're trying to just ignore the damage they're taking, which is admirable, but it's not really going to work out for them. What they need to do is just sort of zone them out with spears, make it so that the archers and the Morannon infantry are not the ones taking these charges. The Morannon Guard are right there after all, and this is pretty much the ideal situation for the Morannon Guard, a cheap unit of spears that you can throw in the way of this cav, and the Pinnith-Galen cavalry actually do rout, getting a little bit too greedy there and charging right into the teeth of the Morannon Guard and the Orc Fodder. The Orc Fodder are spears after all. And now the Mithrandir's retinue. And unfortunately for the Gondorians as well, the Pinnith-Galen cavalry routed into the Mordor army, so they're going to be killed to the last man. No chance that they will be able to come back from that. There are 2 units of Mithrandir's retinue, which even more so than the 2 units of Mithrandir's retinue actually, but actually no, that's just 1 unit of Mithrandir's retinue. They're just spread out. Very strange indeed. But it's going to be significantly tougher to kill off the Mithrandir's retinue than the Pinnith-Galen cavalry. Obviously, all of the defensive values are not only higher, but they have that multiple HP, and they're stronger as well. Just all around a better unit. You can see here, Killeen, or Killeen, a name that I haven't seen before, so I'd assume a newer player. And already they're being peppered down here still by the archers on top of the wall, which is a problem here. They're going to need to answer this, because they are in the killing zone of the Gondorian archers, and already the Gondorians are probably really pleased for this gift that they're essentially being given, because one of the things you always need to do as the defenders is try and whittle down the attacking manpower, because you're outnumbered by such a huge extent. Another charge coming in here. This is also, you know, the hallmark of, obviously this is a terrible mistake when you put it into context. Like, you cannot afford to lose your Nazgul to cycle charging this early on, because the Nazgul are such a useful asset to have in a battle like this later on. But of course, from a Gondorian perspective, this is wonderful, because they're having to fight back against such a huge numbers discrepancy here, and the fact that they've already been able to deal a decent amount of damage here to Mordor, albeit not for no cost, will give them a lot to be pleased about. Obviously, losing an entire unit of Pinith-Galen cavalry is going to concern them, but here you can also see that the Mithrandir's retinue are not going to get a free ride at charging into the Nazgul anymore, and the Nazgul with their huge hit point values are going to be able to survive this, at least for the time being. Unfortunately for the Nazgul, they do have the support of the Inas Rim coming in. Not an ideal cavalry unit to be meeting the Mithrandir's retinue with, but it is better than nothing. The Moran on guard on station, as well as the Orc fodder. The Nazgul are going to try and escape, but here with the runic cavalry cycling out because of the archers in close proximity, you can see that the Mithrandir's retinue will get another charge and manage to kill off another couple of the Nazgul. Very, very positive engagements for Gondor early on against this Mordor army. Meanwhile, over here you can see that Rude trying to micro their cavalry, so their army has kind of stalled for the time being. But Ricky Beagle is a player who has played the game a little bit more so, and he is going to be moving in with his archers, trying to skirmish with the Gondorian positions. But he's skirmishing into the Citadel Guard, and Gondor trying to absorb this fire, and the Citadel Guard heavily armoured, heavily shielded. Like most Gondorian units, Gondor can stand up to this kind of pressure better than most factions. Second only really to the Dwarves, you could argue. But you still don't want to be losing individual men from Citadel Guard units if you can help it. But they do seem to be standing up to the Balaketh marksman fire very resolutely so far. MSQ just trying to sort of hold his ground, and this is probably the better unit for him to go after, because the Pelagia Marines with a full unit can do a lot of damage per second. But even just killing off half or even 3/4 of the unit would be a very worthwhile endeavour, because obviously the Gondorian Javelins, while the Pelagia Marines are not on the same level as something like the Seafarers of Nindamos, that sort of unit, they will still be very devastating against these attacking armies. Obviously out here the Mithrandir's retinue still riding around after causing all that damage to the Nazgul. They'll be very pleased with that. And the Pinith-Galen cavalry got a few decent charges in as well, maybe not accomplishing as much as they would have liked, but at least they didn't die for nothing. Some of those men are sort of almost bent upwards. That looks pretty grim when you think about it. Olakai also standing guard. There's actually only 2 Nazgul left. That's a real disaster for Mordor. You can see that the Gondorians, I think, satisfied with the ammunition they've already expended on Mordor, and now that Mordor are a little bit more spread out, they are going to ignore Mordor for the time being, and instead perhaps start to focus more of their attention on the encroaching Umbar, Corsair Infantry and Balaketh marksmen moving forward to try and put ever more pressure onto the Gondorian defensive lines. Interestingly enough, actually, this gate is open. So Umbar could charge in here, and there's another fact which makes Osgiliath a little bit harder to defend, is there's a lot of space to cover if you're a defender in the interior of the settlement. If the attackers start to wash over you, it's pretty much all over, at least on this side of things. Obviously across the river crossing section of the map, it's a little bit more difficult for the attackers, because it is very much you're being funneled into the defences. But it's how many men the defenders can really send to stop Mordor and Angmar when they have this kind of position to defend as well. Veterans of Osgiliath coming out to maybe try and give Rune something to think about. Variag mercenaries sort of retreating a little bit further away here, which is risky. I mean, that would leave units like the Eastron Warriors wide open to be shot. Very, very vulnerable to archfire as well. Not one of the stronger runic units, but they, you know, like a hot knife through butter, archers are when they shoot into a unit like that. Meanwhile, just having a little look here, obviously it does take a little while for the armies which are over on this side of things to actually get into a position where they can attack, which may be what the attacks over on the other side of the river are waiting for. When Mordor and Angmar start to engage with this choke point over here, they will then start to kick their assault into higher gear, which is probably the right way to go about it. I would still suggest that Umbar are doing the right thing here by putting a little bit more pressure on the Gondorians, and actually you can see Umbar maybe getting a bit too big for their boots here, sending just a single unit of Corsair infantry into the settlement to try and seize some territory, but immediately that is the cue that MSQ was waiting for to charge in with his Citadel Guard, but the Citadel Guard getting shot in the side by those Balaketh marksmen, and without the shield value, the Citadel Guard will go down pretty quickly. The problem the Citadel Guard have now is an MSQ as a whole, he needs to engage now. He sent this single unit forward, the Alcarondas Legion are on the way. With them attacking from the front and with the Corsair Infantry shooting the Citadel Guard in the back, this would be an absolute landslide victory for Umbar, and then they would have their way into the settlement, and it would be difficult to stop the rot then. From a defending perspective, the Citadel Guard are going to be moving forward, the Mithrandir's retinue also on the way forward. I mean, a charge from the Mithrandir's retinue should be enough to wipe away the Corsair Infantry, to be honest with you. And I think that's exactly what MSQ is going to do. A second unit of Citadel Guard also being sent toward the front line. And 2 units of Citadel Guard will be enough to hold back the Alcarondas Legion on account of their AP. And just overall, they're a very high quality unit anyway. Not the best of charges from the Mithrandir's retinue, but the Corsair Infantry are not going to be able to stand up to this kind of pressure for too long, you would imagine. They may very well try and get some point-blank volleys off into the Mithrandir's retinue. You'll scarcely find a more difficult unit of cavalry to kill with archers, but it can be done. You can see they're actually just ignoring the Mithrandir's retinue and shooting into the Citadel Guard, which is probably the right thing to do here. The problem that MSQ is having, he's not giving his cavalry enough room to really get a big meaty charge off into the Corsair Infantry. He just sort of pulled out half-heartedly and then just sort of wandered back in. It will at least stop them from shooting for the time being, but here, the double whammy, as the Balaketh marksmen are now able to shoot into the side of the Mithrandir's retinue. Over here, meanwhile, you can see that Rune getting a little bit closer to the walls now, pushing their siege towers forward to cover them from any Gondorian archers that may deign to shoot at them. You can see there the Carmel's shadow bows also revealing themselves. 2 units of shadow bows. Interesting choice from Vendel. Potentially a very good one, we shall see. Here you can see the Gondorians actually coming out to defend this choke point over here, which is actually a wise thing to do, I think. Because the way that this map has been changed, obviously, instead of like a more ill-defined sort of water crossing, they've sort of made this bridge here. This does allow the Gondorians to move forward and defend this single choke point. You can see that Lalande is going to be shoring this up with Fountain Guard and Wards of the White Tower, which is an incredibly tough defence to try and get through. And not only that, but the Pelargia Marines and the Marksmen of Karandros are also pouring fire into the units which are going to be potentially the reinforcements here. So already Stu Balrog under a lot of pressure before he's barely landed a blow on the Gondorians and he's already taking damage. But I mean, that's not really anything to do with him. The Gondorians have just decided to bring a lot of force to bear immediately, which actually I agree with. You know, a lot of the time you'll see the defenders be a little bit half-hearted trying to save their really heavy hitters for the end. But if you can do enough damage earlier on to justify using it, you should. Because it can make the attackers panic to see a lot of their men disappear quite quickly. Here you can see some Angmar Marauders also coming forward, so Angmar getting involved here. The Nazgul are fighting on the front line, which is probably what's shoring the Orcs up here. If not for them, the Fountain Guard and the Wards of the White Tower would be absolutely monstering that fight between them. And there's obviously still a lot of reinforcements, although this is a bit of a mistake here, and again, this is another example of him being a newer player. Because he's left his unit clearly on fire at will, and the Wards of Minas Ithil, the unit which he can't really afford to be using the ammunition of cheaply, are just sort of firing, but he's managed to catch that before it got too bad at the very least. Over here, meanwhile, the Umbar engagements, how is this going? You can see that Gondor have sent over some more units, some Raven Helms, as well as some Axemen of Lasarnak came over to try and deal with the Corsair Infantry. I say try and deal, they will deal with the Corsair Infantry, both of those units will absolutely destroy them. But the Axemen of the Sarnak getting out of there because the Balaketh marksmen were shooting them. Even with the armour upgrade, they're not ideally suited for dealing with missile fire. Speaking of which, I mean, this is an interesting situation for Umbar to be in. I would say they're most well suited of all of the factions on this side of the river to really get involved in a quality infantry fight with Gondor. But they really need to be supported by the other 2 armies over on this side of the river as well. You can see the Shield Bearers and the Alcarondas Legion are making progress here against the Gondorians, but it's a strong defensive line they're having to deal with. Citadel Guard and Guards of Osgiliath being backed up by more Citadel Guard, Javelins. There's also now the fact that the Axemen of Lasarnak and the Raven Helms have been freed up as well. Mordor, on the other hand, still lagging behind a little bit. They were obviously moving over to try and engage on this gate. He is now skirmishing with Gondor, though, putting them under a little bit of pressure with his own archers, which is good to see. See if the Orc archers are able to make anything more than minor scratches on the Gondorian defensive lines. Probably not. You can actually see that, again, maybe another example of him being slightly newer, just sending in the Orc fodder all on their lonesome. They're not going to achieve anything against these Gondorian units. Fully upgraded Gondor infantry and Citadel Guard are going to be able to beat Orc fodder without taking many casualties at all. Variag mercenaries are helping though, and that will be good news for Mordor, the fact that they're getting some support from the runic missile troops. Rune, however, are still lagging a little bit further behind their allies. They're not really making a play for this choke point at all, which is kind of understandable when you see the scale of the defensive line they're having to deal with. But eventually they're going to have to go in there, and it's probably better to do so when your allies are still putting genuine pressure on the enemy than waiting for them to all die. Meanwhile, over here it's just an absolute slaughterhouse, as we see that Mordor and Angmar showing no signs of slowing down, as they actually commit units like Blackwatch Legion, which could be a bit of a problem for the Gondorian line here. That is maybe a little bit overly risky, however, from Stu Balrog. He's using his Troll Catapult to try and get some hits onto the Gondorian line. He's more likely to hit his own troops with that angle, though, and the Orcs, we know what they're like when it comes to routing. The Blackwatch Legion are trying to push their way through, but I mean, this could go poorly. The Pelargir Marines are moving forward now, the ones that are out of ammunition, to try and help shore up the defensive line. What are the Gondorians going to do here? Marksmen of Caer-Andros, are they going to retreat here? Yeah, I think Gondor have lost their bottle a little bit here, and they are going to retreat. Well, actually, no, they're not. They're going to send the Marksmen of Caer-Andros in, or are they? Gondor needs to make up its mind here, because his front line is being tested, but it's not breaking yet. I think this is a defensive line which can be saved, honestly. And with the Raven Helms and the Marksmen of Caer-Andros, they should be able to do so. The Black Legion of Barad-dûr and the Blackwatch Legion should fizzle out pretty quickly, honestly. You can see here that the Wardens of the White Tower are still fighting hard. Gondor infantry still in support. Fountain Guard depleted now, certainly, but still fighting. And now also some Gondor infantry. So yeah, Gondor, with all the resources they committed out here, I think they're doing the right thing. You could argue whether trying to defend this choke point with this much vigour was the right thing to do initially, but now that he has, committing more to stop this shield wall push is absolutely the right thing to do. Don't give the Orcs the opportunity to gain more kills than necessary. Wardens of Minas Ithil getting into position. I mean, they're still trying to push, but they're not going to be able to push their way through all this. They're more likely to break, honestly. But Mordor and Angmar subsequently are also doing the right thing by continually sending reinforcements in here, because there are gaps now. There are gaps which can be exploited unless the Gondorians patch them over. We'll see if they're able to do that. Meanwhile, how are Rune getting along? Rune's still kind of lagging behind their allies a little bit. You can see that they are, at the very least, however, putting some pressure on the Gondorians with their archers, which, considering their army composition, was clearly more of a focus for them than the other two over on this side of the river. Eastron Warriors are actually moving in over here as well, so Rune actually trying to help out Mordor. Eastron Warriors are pretty decent for what they are. Like, as militia tier units, they are actually stronger in melee than the Eastron Clansmen, who many people praise. But the main problem with them is this, like, they are getting absolutely butchered there by a volley. I think that was from the Athelian Rangers before they started moving, and that's the problem. They're hideously vulnerable to ranged fire, and Mordor are sending over more and more units of Morannon, but Mordor are also very stretched. Like, there will come a point where Mordor can't sustain this assault and their reinforcements will be too far away. To their credit, they are sending over more units now, but oh boy, don't want to get too close to that, because that will definitely be a crash with how many units are clustered together with that range of fire going into them. Meanwhile, Umbar, who were unceremoniously forced back out of the settlement, Pelargir Marines throwing some javelins at point-blank range into the Corsair crossbows. Not surprising to see them pop up, obviously, but maybe a little bit surprising to see them committed so early. I mean, one of the things the attackers could certainly do over on this side of the river is force Gondor into using a lot of their archers and then saving units like this for later. Committing them this early, however, will allow the Gondorians to just sort of fend them off with their archers. Obviously very, very low armour values there. Axemen of Lasarnak on the front line now as well, adding even more AP, and units like the Adunheim Shield Guard are of really high quality, but it's not necessarily what Umbar need on the front line at the moment. I'm not really sure what Umbar can do about this situation though, because with a quality-centric army like this, you don't really have the numbers to push your way through, but you're never going to have as much quality as the defenders in this kind of situation. So I mean, Ricky Beagle is doing his bit, but I think he's going to need more from his allies on this side of the river to put more pressure on the Gondorians if he's going to have much in the way of success. This, however, is good from Mordor. Sending forward the Olag High will immediately force Gondor to commit more units over here, because immediately with the Olag High on station and with the continued range support they're getting from both the Runic and the Mordor skirmishers, suddenly this front line is looking pretty battered and bruised, and if he has more infantry on station, if he can pour in this Morannon Guard to help out this assault, he could make this stick. But the problem that the Olag High will have, caught in melee with Vanguard of King Elisar and Nimlothi and Honor Guard, they will start to fall away. So Mordor need to seize the initiative now, be aggressive, and start flooding in through these gaps. But like I said, his army is a little bit too disparate at this point, and that may be what ends up costing him in the long run. Rune, meanwhile, still pretty stationary. The orcs over here, meanwhile, have managed to force their way through, so in the end, Gondor's defence and will was broken, and they have decided to fall back within the fortifications now, which now it is the right thing to do. Like, obviously things went sour over here, and this is a big victory for the attackers, honestly, because things over on the side of the settlement you'd expect the attackers to be doing well and are actually not going as well as you would perhaps expect. But over here, the opposite is happening, where the defenders should have a more significant advantage with how the geography of the map is laid out. The defenders are having a little bit tougher of a time, because in this case the mass push wasn't entirely successful, but it did at least make some gaps for other units to then sort of flood in through. Orc Fella's now coming forward from Irish Gunner, and Stu Balrog backing him up appropriately. There's a lot of good units on station here, but now can the Gondorians hold this line? There's some Nimlothian Honour Guard here, which Orc Fellas are not going to be sufficient to defeat Nimlothian Honour Guard, and I think the Orcs see that. There's a lot of quality units just in behind this wall. It'll be interesting to see how Lalan deals with that. More archers as well. Gondor need to ration their manpower here, because obviously this is the thing which is always going to be a problem in a 3v5. Do you have enough men to just continue your defence? And I don't know. Moran on guard are now moving forward. The Olag High, I think they pulled back because they were seeing more reinforcements come their way. They're now pushing back in, however, now that the Orc spears have caught up. But the opportunity has gone, unfortunately, for Mordor. They had a good chance there to take advantage of the gaps, but unfortunately they weren't fast enough on the uptake. And now they're going to have to go back to doing things the old-fashioned way. Rune continuing to try and skirmish with the enemy, but they really don't have the best of shots here in the positions that they're in. They're having to go over the walls. You can see there the flaming arrows leaving their mark, but doing little else really. Gondorians will be very pleased if Rune continue to engage them in that way. Umbar, meanwhile, now with the Balakith shield bearers, are going to try and get up onto the walls with some of their mace men. Veterans of OSGILIATH moving over, who are no pushovers in melee, but they're not dedicated infantry like the Balakith shield bearers are. But Umbar are definitely having a torrid time of things over here. They really haven't been able to impose themselves onto Gondor at all. And now you can see the marksmen of Caer Andros also being sent forward to shore up the line. Gondor, I think, are in a little bit of danger, however, of overcommitting over here. I did notice that on the central choke point where Angmar and Mordor are going across there was quality units over there, but not enough units, I think, to stop Mordor and Angmar if they really decided to continue their push. We shall see. But certainly over here for now, Umbar are right where Gondor want them, which is, again, not necessarily a bad thing, because Umbar had a lot of quality. You can't let that quality run amok through the settlement's interior. But Umbar ain't done yet. They still have these Balaketh units which can be used to good effect. AP, Veterans of OSGILIATH are shooting. Not sure what at. Sort of pinging their arrows all over the place. Meanwhile, more of the Mordor army is now heading over to this gate to try and put even more pressure on it. But Mordor still have not really made their way into the settlement at all. That unit's Citadel Guard is going to be dealt with, but there's a whole unit of upgraded Gondor infantry and guards of OSGILIATH waiting to pick up the slack on this defence. Marksmen with Caer Andros now, they don't have shields, so these Orc archers will be able to impose themselves a little bit more against them than they otherwise would. But there's an Nimlothian Honour Guard with Thrandir's retinue actually pointing the wrong way, so their shields won't be coming into effect. There are reinforcements close enough by. This shouldn't be too much of an issue. There's Lalan's Trebuchet, which actually missed in the army compositions, but a very useful tool to have indeed. There's a Troll Catapult. Meanwhile, this is a lot of Orcs which are trying to force their way in through over here. And it's only one unit of Citadel Guard which is really holding them all at bay. A lot of arrows whizzing through that gap though from a couple of units of Gondor archers. Maybe not the most devastating archer in the world, but their support is going to be very necessary here to try and whittle down this Orc horde. They're also getting some friendly fire, however, into the back of their own men, which is the last thing you want as a defender. Some Gondor infantry, albeit depleted, moving forward. I don't know if 40 Gondor infantry is the answer in this situation. Hopefully for Gondor, however, they can free up a lot of resources by crushing some of the outer attackers over here. And still, Mordor playing into Gondor's hands a little bit. The opportunity to brute force their way through is kind of gone at this point. And now Gondor have got that very favourable Crescent Moon engagement against Mordor, and now Mordor are going to be filing into the Gondorians and getting themselves killed. A lot of these are lower end Orc units, but they're going to be dying en masse to the Gondorian defenders. Some Gondor infantry heading over towards Rune. Rune are still yet to make their true move. Narim trying to do some damage to the Gondor infantry, and they're going to succeed here. It looks far more devastating than it is. Their fire arrows are actually no more damaging than a standard archer. It's entirely cosmetic in this case, and you can tell from the fact that only one of the Gondor infantrymen actually fell there. But it still looks neat nonetheless. A few more Gondor infantrymen falling. What are Umbar getting up to? Umbar's still very much locked in place, but they are now up onto the walls with some Balaketh Axguard, but man, those Balaketh shield bearers got absolutely monstered by the vanguard of King Elisar and the veterans of Osgiliath combined. And now, with Wardens of the White Tower and vanguard of King Elisar, man, it's harsh on Umbar here, because Umbar are having to deal with a ton of pressure. But he is continuing to send units into the settlement in spite of that, so you have to say it's on Ricky Beagle that this is happening in the first place. And those 2 units of Balaketh are going to be repulsed, and there's not much that Umbar can bring to the table anymore. Gondor have done a very good job at dealing grievous damage to his army. And Umbar not really going to be able to offer much more, and actually seeing this, I think MSQ is going to be siphoning off more of his resources to try and help stop the Angmar and Mordor problem in the middle. Speaking of which, let's get back to that, because this is where the attackers have had the most luck so far, and indeed, you know, the undermanned nature of this defence over here is really starting to cost the defenders. I think they've gotten a little bit greedy trying to hoard kills on the outer layers, and they haven't kept their eyes on the ball here. And the momentum that the Orcs have had right through the middle, through the area of the settlement where honestly the defenders should have the advantage, and the Orcs have managed to turn that against them. And you know, the defenders may be trying to hope they could skimp on their defences over here a little bit more, and the Orcs came forward with a lot of aggression, and they've managed to make a good deal of progress. Now this could turn against the Orcs, because this will be costing them. It's going to be costly to sort of keep up this sort of pace, especially with units like Wardens of Minas Ithil using their body-piercing arrows into the centre of that Orc horde. But I mean, if they can keep up the pressure here, you know, keep up the momentum, it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for the defenders to recover from that. And now you can see that they're also starting to put some pressure over on this choke point over here. You can see they were trying to sort of avoid getting grilled by the Witchers, but in so doing, they've given the attackers the gap they need to pour some Goblins and Guardians of Khan Doom in here. Very, very tough here for the defenders to try and stop this kind of thing once it's started, but MSQ has sent over some reinforcements now, which perhaps should have arrived sooner. I mean, Umbar is still a factor in this battle, so you can't afford to send over a bunch, but it was maybe overkill the amount they sent over, especially up on the walls. Like, the Balaketh would have been repulsed by just one of those elites instead of both. Maybe not as fast, but again, it's weighing up the pros and cons of these things, which is how the battle will be decided in the long run. Alcarondas Legion are here. Defeat seems certain. They're still being kept at arm's length ultimately. Of course, infantry in the background. There's some Alcarondas Faithful, actually, some melee knights. If they get into the settlement and start running around, that's another headache the defenders would have to deal with. Meanwhile, over here, yet more Mordor forces pouring forwards. The Gondorians are probably sick to the back teeth of seeing that red eye banner charging into their position, but at least over on this side of the engagement they've mostly been able to deal with Mordor fairly comfortably. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr coming forward now maybe could push their way through this Gondorian defence. In fact, I say maybe, definitely, this is not substantial enough to stop a Great Shield unit, I don't think. These Mithrandir's retinue, there's also the Athelian Rangers who are now taking the brunt of the Morannon Archer fire. That's good from Killeen. Definitely going after the right target here. These Athelian Rangers need to get out of there. They're going to be an absolutely crucial cornerstone of the Gondorian defence moving forward. Meanwhile, Rune trying to use their Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen and their Naft projectiles. Actually, no, they don't have their Naft projectiles anymore, do they? They have their throwing knives. Trying to soften up the Gondorians as much as they possibly can before their more limited infantry force charges in, but it's still fairly substantial in terms of its AP. Those Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are no slouches in melee either, a lot of defensive skill. You can see over here that the Gondorian Trebuchet was trying to get into position to bombard them from close range, but the Trolls managed to get in behind the lines, not only proving to get in the way of the Trebuchet, but also the Wardens of Minas Ithil, and they need these ranged tools to do their job here, the Gondorians. Although I think the Wardens of Minas Ithil may have actually run out of ammunition because they're charging into melee here. They do have multiple HP, so they're not going to be a complete non-event in melee, but look at all the Orcs here. It's perfect for the Trebuchet, honestly, to start evening the score a little bit. But it needs to get into position and it needs to start shooting immediately. I do have some sympathy with the pathfinding of that particular unit, however. Temple Executioners coming underneath the building here and starting to attack this particular Gondorian defence from the side, or they may actually completely bypass it, try and go for the trebuchet here. There really is nothing on station to stop them if they so chose, but they are actually going to go in from behind on this Gondorian defence. The Bulldogs are in there as well, a bit of AP. The Gondorians are holding their own at the minute. The attack that came over here was significantly less intense than the one that came down this street. Obviously you kind of have to pick the places where you're going to pressure fully. Well, here comes the trebuchet, and this could be the turning point in this battle for the defenders if they manage to continue using their missiles. That's probably not what the defenders want, though, having to utilise the rotting meat in this way, although to be fair, it probably will affect the orcs more so than the defenders, so some of those lower tier orcs may very well rout in the face of all this arrow fire and that rotting meat. We shall see. Meanwhile, the orc forces over on this side, the Blackguard of Barad are actually not able to push their way through. And as long as they are kept at arm's length by units like the Vanguard of King Elisar, Warns of the White Tower, and of course the Zweihanders of the Ravenhelms of Caer Andros, there goes a general. And it is actually the general that was going through the narrow gate over there. So that, I think, will be Stewed Balrog's general. But over here, the other Mordor army is still not making too much headway. They still have a fair amount of reinforcements, though, so they're certainly not done just yet. Speaking of reinforcements, Umbar still trying to push their way through this gate. Still having a real hard time of it, and obviously they're still being given the business by a depleted unit of Pelargir Marines, but that's just tilting this fight even more into the Gondorians' favour. These Warns of the White Tower also on the way over. Marksmen of Caer Andros that still have ammunition, which is worrying if the crossbow Corsairs were to come back and try and get into range, which I'm sure is what Umbar want to do, but with archers still there, you can, because they'll just immediately get slaughtered. Meanwhile, a lot of routed off Gondorian troops. Gondorians, actually, I mean, they're at least holding their own against the Bulldogs, but they will lose that fight ultimately. But here you can see Lalan, he is going to try and charge in, although it wasn't the best charge into the Temple Executioners, but I mean, it's something. It's going to stop their advance at the very least. Veterans Osgiliath will also be able to hold the trebuchet, though. You can see here the trebuchet has very limited ammunition, so it is now going to charge in. What that says to me is they did actually use their trebuchet ammunition earlier in the fight at some point, and it wasn't all that effective, wasting their ammunition by keeping it on fire at will right from the off, perhaps. But you can see here this stink cloud, the rotting meat, and it is having an effect on the orcs and the Snaga here. Most of them are shaken. It'll only be the elites that are going to be able to hold up here, and the Gondorians. It does look as though the orcs have run out of steam a little bit over here, because they don't really have much left with which to continue their assault other than the stuff that's way back there. Still some trolls, still some goblin band, but not the caliber of units that you really want to be sending into a fight against Ravenhelms and Fountain Guard. Guards of Osgiliath in there shoring up the line as well. So Gondor have weathered the storm over on this side. Over here it's a little bit more complicated with the Temple Executioners sort of in and amongst their business. But the Fountain Guard are on their way over to check this advance, and with the charges they've taken, Fountain Guard should be enough to finish that fight off. Bulldogs are over here. Now you can see that the Witchram Pikemen and Gundabad Guard are moving in. Gondor's defence over here is looking a little bit more thin on the ground. Going to have to be very, very careful here, Gondor. It is a delicate balancing act. There are the Axemen of the Sarnak fighting underneath the buildings against yet more Mordor forces. But I mean, if one of these defences crumbles, it's going to be really difficult for Gondor to recover from that, so they need to send more reinforcements over here, because now it's there where the true danger lies. But the Temple Executioners are kind of in the way. More Rangers from Athelion over there as well. Gondor able to repel that Mordor assault. It's never a good thing when you see an assault outright thrown back. But Mordor are still alive, so they can at least mount another one. Rune, meanwhile, are finally going to be mounting an attack of their own. The Flagrim and the Gamprim, actually, yeah, Flagrim and Gamprim taking point. And you can also see just around the side here the Narim, the runic player, doing exactly the right thing, trying to shoot as best he can into the side of the Gondorian force. Obviously it looks far more devastating than it is, like I said, but it is still going to be very useful, especially against the Fountain Guard, because Rune doesn't really have something which can go toe-to-toe with the Fountain Guard, unfortunately for them. But of course, even if they don't hit the Fountain Guard, they'll hit some Gondor infantry and wear down that Gondorian line. It also looks really cool that it sets fire to the ground that the projectiles hit. It looks as though the walls are on fire, which is really neat. Meanwhile, over here, the really aggressive assault that was mounted by Angmar and Mordor can also see the Witchers here have taken a ton of damage from archers, but they still have some projectile throwers, and they could do some really, really nasty damage here to Gondor, but they're actually, I think, going to retreat. The Witchers can always be a significant turning point in a battle. And actually you can see over here, it doesn't look as though the Witchers were a turning point over here, it just looked as though brute force was. Because Angmar continuing to push their way forward, although MSQ and Rastlin sending over reinforcements. Elite units as well, the Vanguard of King Elisar and the Fountain Guard both coming forward to try and stop this advance. But I mean, it's not a particularly well coordinated defensive line, this, and Angmar could really use that to their advantage, because it's going to be really difficult to recover from that kind of mistake when Barrow Wights are here. And there you can see also the Mordor catapult getting a nice hit there right through the Fountain Guard. There's also some more veterans of Osgiliath heading over here. There you can see the Witchers have now loosed their payload, and that really strong Gondorian defensive line has now had a lot of damage dealt to it. The Witchers, it's probably a good thing here for the attackers, to be honest with you, because they were really struggling here against the defenders, to be honest. But now between the catapult and the Witchers, they've certainly managed to even the score a little bit, getting a really nice hit there into the marksman of Caer Andros, drastically reducing the amount of men in that particular unit. Mithrandir's retinue also charging back out. Catapult doing its thing. How are Umbar getting along? Still struggling, which again is unsurprising. Like, I think Umbar was dealt the roughest hand just because of how the defenders decided to deal with Umbar. A lot of strength was put into dealing with them right from the off, and now they're really going to struggle to get through what Gondor has left over here to try and deal with what's left of Umbar. There's obviously Axeman of Sarnak still in here, albeit very depleted, but just the fact that there are still guards of Osgiliath over here is going to be a real problem, I think, for Umbar. Meanwhile, have Mordor resumed their assault on this gate? They have. How successful is it? Not all that successful at the moment, because they're leading the way with their lowest quality troops, which what's left of the Gondorians over here won't have too many troubles in holding them at bay without any sort of quality support. There's also the Black Guard of Barad-dûr over there as well. Citadel Guard shuffling their way over here. Gondorians holding firm against this runic assault now as well. But there's a lot of AP included in here, and with the Scion Rim it's a pretty solid assault as well. But like I said, I mean, it's difficult to contest this kind of fight with a unit like the Fountain Guard. One of the very best in this sort of situation in the game, really. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are here. There's a lot of reinforcements Rune can still commit. I say a lot. There's enough reinforcements that Rune can still commit without being overly concerned. They're sending over some Narim perhaps to try and expedite Mordor's advance into the settlement. So far they've been very much diffused. Here you can see the Gondorians now actually pushing forward, perhaps chasing the Witchers off, and at this point, well, there goes another shot from the Witchers, getting a fantastic vantage point here. That's going to be devastating. And yeah, you can see all of the hard work that Gondor had put into stopping this advance, and it looked like they were finally turning the page. But I mean, I can see what people say when they don't like the Witchers, because I do feel as though Gondor's play on the defence up to this point has merited a bigger reward than they're getting, because the Witchers are able to essentially undo some of the attacking errors that have been made. The attackers maybe got a little bit too greedy with their pushes, but they're not being punished as much as they could have been because of the Witchers. But by the same token, the Gondorians have dumped all of their arrows equally as greedily into the attacking blobs, I should say, and they've left none left now for the Witchers, and the Witchers are just able to go about their business unimpeded. So mixed thoughts on that, I would say. And there you can see the Witchers actually point blank shot into the Ravenhelms. That guy is actually not broken, which is very, very impressive actually, I would say. Ooh, that's bad as well. Nice hit there into the Fountain Guard. Can the Gondorians recover from this, I wonder? Because now I can only imagine that with all the damage they're taking, Angmar is also going to get a bit of a leg up. And they're going to have very little in the way of reinforcements to send over to try and stop Mordor's advance. But once again, Mordor have just been thrown back out of the settlement. It's not good when you see this when you're the attacker. Narim getting into a more advantageous position to shoot into Gondor. Gondor getting into loose formation to try and mitigate some of this damage. The Gondor infantry will be able to absorb a decent amount of this fire, but it's more casualties they're going to be taking. Yeah, I mean, Gondor won't mind too much that it's Gondor infantry that they're losing, but in an ideal world they would be in melee at least getting some kills into the bargain for this. In comes some Flag Rim. perhaps hoping to bait the Fountain Guard back into range of the archers, because the Flag Rim alone will almost certainly be enough to teach the Gondor infantry a most painful lesson. Their 2 levels of armour upgrade won't help too much against those maces and axes that the Flag Rim traffic in. Meanwhile, you can see this street now is just deserted. The Mithrandir's retinue actually doing the right thing here from a Gondorian perspective, counter-attacking. They need to keep that sort of thing up, I think. They could go into these stragglers and break them. At least make it so that nothing will reinforce this assault, which could be the difference between victory and defeat here, because still, in spite of the beating they've taken at the hands of the Witchers, the Gondorians are still holding fast here and still looking like they're going to win on the back of the quality of their infantry here. The Fountain Guard at the centre, and then units like the Warns of the White Tower as well, really doing work on the front line. Still reasons to be cheerful from a Gondorian perspective then. Umbar, however, much less so. They're still, at the very least, they're still engaging. There goes the Angmar General, playing into what I just said, but I do have a lot of sympathy, I think, here for Umbar, like I said, but at least he is engaging some of the Gondorian resources. Umbar have really had a tough time in this fight, but they're at least still contributing to their team, which I like to see. Obviously, unfortunately for Ricky Beagle, he most certainly won't be the MVP at the end of this match unless he's able to pull out some kind of hidden unit and do that. Castamir's Rangers, perhaps. It's not looking good for him so far. Meanwhile, Gondor over here still just... Killeen is just unable to get into the settlement here. He's going to be leading the way with another Great Shield unit. Both units of Great Shield infantry, actually, and I think here... The issue that Mordor are having, because we've seen these Great Shield units in melee before, Mordor are losing their bottle every time. Like, you need to commit and you need to stay committed. You can't afford to just go in and then go, it's not really working out, I'm going to pull out. Because you're going to take absolutely horrendous losses over the course of a battle if you do that. And I mean, you know, a newer player, but you need to sort of commit and stay committed. Even if you end up losing, you'll be of more help to your team if you commit and put genuine pressure onto the defenders consistently throughout the entire battle, rather than doing what the Mordor player has done thus far. Ravenhelm's only 42 of them coming in, because the Blackguard at this point, if they do commit themselves, they could bulldoze their way through that line. 42 Ravenhelms won't be enough to overturn that, unfortunately for them. Rune really trying to put some more pressure on the Gondorians, but they're still really struggling again. All the quality that Gondor have in their infantry lines really making life very difficult for Rune, and Rune, in fact, are now starting to rout. Not good for them. Not good for them at all. Oh, excuse me. Mithrandir's retinue. There's only 5 of them, but at the very least, again, they're still trying to contribute with kills. Scion Rim are also moving in. But Rune also started to look a little bit thin on the ground. They have shadow bows somewhere, which I don't think they've used yet. Which again is a bit of a saving grace. And this is a big moment in this fight now, because there is a potential gap that can be used here, and I can't help but notice that Umbar could still contribute massively to an attacking victory here with the Alcarondas Faithful. The problem they have is the front line that's here is still largely made up of Citadel Guard, so if this cavalry gets caught up on them, they will get slaughtered. There's also pikes in here as well, but here you can see the Alcarondas Faithful are going to be able to push their way through to some extent. How will the Gondorians react to this, I wonder? Because they're going to be healthy enough to cause some significant damage, unless they have something to stop them. Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Defeat seems certain. In comes the Sauron's Will. Yeah, there goes the Umbar General. But most of the unit did make it through. It's unfortunate the General was one of the ones... Well, I say most of the unit, actually. About half. If this cavalry can charge into some of the Gondorian weak points, then that will be worth it. If not, it's just another waste, unfortunately. Gondor could shut down that cavalry by just chasing them with the Mithrandir's retinue. It will at least stop the Alcarondas Faithful from getting any nasty charges off. Meanwhile, over here, when Snagar archers are your ace in the hole to try and come forward and break a Gondorian infantry line, you know you're in trouble. Gondor are going to be able to hold this choke point indefinitely, I would suggest. Mithrandir's retinue coming forward once again. Perhaps trying to sally out of the walls once again to try and get some rear charges, but rear charges on what, I wonder? Goblin Band? I mean, yeah, Angmar are really scraping the barrel with Goblin Band and Snagar. Even the Trolls are just the catapult crew at this point. So, in the end, the Mordor-Angmar push, while it looked very impressive early on, it has cost them in the long run because they have very little left. continue their assault. Rune, on the other hand, all of a sudden things looking a little bit more rosy for them as they're able to push their way into the settlement. However, they're immediately going to be set upon by the Athelian Rangers. At least they're trying to make something happen, though, to their credit. Very, very nice. What is happening over here? Blackguard of Barad-dûr pushing their way through wards of Minas Ithil. So I think actually the Alcarondas faithful... this could be a little bit self-centered of Umbar here. He's going to try and recharge his section of the line, but to be brutally honest, his army is going to be of very little help if it got inside. And I feel like using his cavalry to try and save his own skin was maybe the wrong idea. I feel as though they should have been sent over to help Rune, because Rune looked like they could make some progress, but ultimately I think this battle is, bit by bit, edging towards Gondor in terms of how it's going. Athelian Rangers, again, only 20 of them, but these Rangers will still be able to really dish out some punishment over the long haul. Alcarondas faithful heading back this way now, getting into the Pelargian Marines, but I think maybe the window where they could have done significant damage has probably passed. Fountain Guard holding their ground as well. The attackers are going to have to rely on Gondor's armies just collapsing from the sheer effort they've had to put in to get this far. In come the Carmel Shadow Bows. I mean, Rune are definitely the ones I think in the best position to do some damage to Gondor here. Pelargian Marines are shaken. Wards of Minas Ithil in a very nice position indeed. In comes some Nar-Rim, trying to stop the advance of the Marksmen of Caer Andros. Obviously the Marksmen of Caer Andros easily the stronger of the two when it comes to melee. Wards of Minas Ithil rushing forth as well. Pelargian Marines trudging into melee range. Victory is a distinct possibility for the Citadel Guard, which is unsurprising considering the calibre of opponents they're facing, mostly Moran infantry. There are, to be fair, some Sauron's will in there as well. But at this late stage of proceedings, unfortunately, that isn't going to be enough for them. A little bit further back, you can see there's some rousing runic troops as well. How are Umbar getting on? Well, I mean, Umbar... Of course, I'm actually surprised. I mean, yeah. When those fences get committed, I mean, Umbar will eventually, it looks like, be able to force their way into the settlement. But I mean, at what cost? I mean, there's still 58 Citadel Guard, to be honest with you, which, to be fair, should lose to 81 fencers, and the Harbingers are also back there, but Umbar have got so little manpower left, they're going to have to hope that it's not just them that's able to get into the settlement. It's going to be close, I think. Alcarondas faithful are going to be charging towards the Pelargian Marines once again. The unit of 21 is going to be able to get a volley off. I mean, the Alcarondas faithful, to be fair, they've been cycle charging into this unit of Pelargian Marines over here, and they've nearly completely destroyed it. And a unit of Javelins in the late game could be the difference between victory and defeat here, with how this battle is going. What have we got going on out here? Not much by the looks of things. In fact, you can see with the Mithrandir's retinue out over here patrolling the bridge, it's almost looking as if Mordor and Angmar have been completely destroyed. There goes a general of some description. I would assume actually that's probably the runic general. No real dedicated general's bodyguard units from Rune, which is an interesting choice, especially in the face of units like Wardens of the White Tower and Vanguard of King Elisar, who are coming forward and are really putting the Gamp Rim to the sword now. Nasty stuff for them. Athelian Rangers trying to get some point-blank shots into the runic lines. There are the Carmel Shadowbows who are trying to lay down their own body-piercing archer fire, but I think that is going to be very short-lived ultimately. More projectiles thudding into the vanguard of King Elisar. Still the Marksmen of Caer Andros loosing their shots into this section of the runic army, and that's where the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are, so that's a very good choice, unshielded as they are. A huge melee defense value as well. Outstrips most of what the elves are even capable of producing. Here though, combination of the Inas Rim and what's left of the Alcarondas faithful charging in to a clutch of Marksmen of Caer Andros and Pelargian Marines. I don't think it's going to be too important though. Another runic cataphract falls. Citadel Guard trudging over here. I mean, it's still giving the announcer is still giving the advantage to the attackers, and I feel as though that's because there are units like Temple Executioners out here still uncommitted. A full unit of Minas Morgul's chosen. Actually, that is where the general is, interestingly enough, I think. We'll see. I mean, this Mordor player, we'll see if his hesitation is ultimately what causes the attacker's demise here. Hesitation is defeat. Meanwhile, in come the Balakith Axe Guard. So now Umbar coming in from left field with what they have left. I mean, they probably have the best quality of anyone that's left overall. I mean, yes, there's the upgraded Temple Executioners, but Umbar have got the Harbingers as well as Fencers and this unit of Balakith Axe Guard, and they finally, I think, Ricky Beagle may very well be able to penetrate deep into the settlement here. We'll see. In come the Fencers as well. I mean, now is the moment to try and make some sort of Umbarim advance stick. The Veterans of Osgiliath are very accomplished in melee, but they're going to be overwhelmed here by AP damage. Balakith Axe Guard with an armor upgrade are a very sturdy unit of Axemen, both defensively and offensively. They're probably my favourite axe unit of that type from a defensive standpoint. Over here, though, looking more and more like a ghost town, really. Goblin Band are routing, being chased down by marksmen. I mean, they're not going to come back, I don't think, a unit of 68 that's taken such a beating. The Gondorians are starting to run low on manpower, though, to be fair. But they've done a very good job so far, Gondor, of taking a lot of punishment and dishing out a lot of punishment as well. There goes the Runic General. So it was actually a Gondorian general that fell over here. Not that it matters now. I think Rune are also starting to fall by the wayside here, really. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, do they have anything left out here? No. So their assault ultimately, while they did make it a fair way into the settlement, ultimately, like every other assault so far, it has been turned back by the Gondorians. Very, very impressive. So it's going to come down to Killeen's Mordor army and Ricky Beagle's Umbar army to see if they can salvage victory from the jaws of defeat. I'm not so sure. I mean, personally, I feel as though Gondor probably merited the victory so far. They played very well, but it is difficult to get a victory as the defenders in this sort of situation. And now you can see also moving in. In come the Temple Executioners, but they're not being... Well, now they're being supported by the Minas Morgul Chosen. They really should have been brought forward together from the start. In come the Fountain Guard. They're going to need something a little bit more substantial to stop these Mordor units. I mean, they are shooting them with depleted archers, but that's not going to do the damage quickly enough to stop the Mordor forces heading through the settlement. Meanwhile, we are into the final 10k frames. I mean, the attackers, they're behind by 2%, but that's not a huge amount, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things. Citadel Guard trudging forwards. They're eager, but they're tired. The AP will be very useful against the Temple Executioners, but will it be enough? With the archer support, maybe it will. How are Umbar getting along? There's still the Mithrandir's retinue as well, which is always going to be a bit of a heart sinker for the attackers, because they're going to have to deal with getting charged by a very accomplished unit of lancers as well. The Fencers, but Umbar finally, after such a punishing battle for them, they are finally going to be able to advance into the settlement. Fencers are going to try and form up. They don't really have an answer to the cavalry though, and Lalan is going to be able to charge in here. Most of his infantry, I think, was killed during the heroic defence against Angmar and Mordor. They're going to charge in here. They're going to try and land a charge onto the... They are winded here, the cavalry. Didn't really get a very good charge off at all. And now the Fencers are going to be able to throw their javelins in. Yeah, a bit of a disastrous charge overall, actually. Umbar going to be able to make Lalan's cavalry pay for that fairly dearly, you'd have to say. What is going on over here? Can't help but notice as though Stu Balrog still has a part to play in this battle with his Troll Catapult. That's pretty much all he has left. Angmar, I think, are pretty much done for though. Can this Troll Catapult be useful? And this is where the speed comes into play, because they can get in quickly and actually try to use some of that devastating artillery fire, and it could be very key here, because they could get a shot right into this Gondorian resistance over here. There goes the Mordor general that's over here, however, and that could be enough to send some of the lower tier units that he still has left routing. The Orc Archers are shaken after all, and those numbers could be the difference between victory and defeat, like I said. The Temple Executioners fighting hard on the front line, but they're going to have to deal with pikes and all sorts, and yeah, the Vanguard of King Elisar, they've seen much more battle than the Temple Executioners, but it's still another strong unit. The Nazgul, amusingly enough, the Nazgul that were getting charged so unceremoniously at the start of the battle, getting in the way of the marksmen of Kaer Andros from shooting. They will ultimately be killed off, but that delay fine margins by which this battle could be won and lost here. What have we here? Harbingers is... Well, Umbar are going to be making a play for the town centre here, which will force the Gondorians' hand here. They will need to send something to stop Umbar, but will it be substantial enough? I don't think it will. The Harbingers of Castamere are coming over. The Balakath Axe Guard. Victory seems certain. Pelagia Marines, Marksmen, few Axemen of Lasarnak trying to hold back the Corsair Fencers, but the real coup de grace over here will be the Harbingers of Castamere. Gondor really have nothing over in this part of the battlefield which can even come close to dealing with them. 10 Wardens of the White Tower is not going to be enough. They're far too depleted and seen far too much battle. All of these units are over here. There's some Guards of Osgiliath that are actually not perpetually routing, so they can form themselves up, as well as some Fountain Guard. Across come the Mithrandir's retinue. They're going to be needed, as well as the Vanguard of King Elisar. What have we here? Orc Javelins are shaken. They're fresh, though. So at least they won't die tired, because they're immediately going to be engaged by Wardens of Minas Ithil, and Orc Javelins are trash in melee. Look at this one Nazgul still stopping those marksmen from firing. There's only a few of them left now. Not going to be dealing an awful lot of DPS now. Gondor still... Ooh, that's body-piercing projectiles, though. Depleted Ithilian Rangers, but that could be the fine margins by which they can defeat Mordor here. And they will need to defeat Mordor, because Umbar are putting pressure on the other side. There you can see a Gondor general falling to the very stylish Harbingers of Castamere. Fantastic battle so far, I have to say. Probably the best one I've done on Osgiliath since I started doing these. Over here, meanwhile, Umbar. I said Umbar weren't going to get MVP. Maybe I may have to change that assumption, actually, if Ricky Beagle's able to pull out a victory for his team here. It's still going to be tricky for him, I think, but just the addition of these crossbowmen here may be enough to ensure that the arrival of the Vanguard of King Elisar won't be enough to turn this fight around. There's some pole arms on the way, the Fountain Guard and the Guards of Osgiliath, but will that be enough? Is another question. Victory seems certain for the Umbar forces. The momentum is with them. Can they make it stick? The cavalry is getting in and amongst the crossbows to stop them from firing. But with only 2 of these cavalrymen left, the crossbows should be able to skewer them with those harpoons that they hold in their hands. 2 very distinct engagements going on, and Gondor at this point, they are running low on manpower. They're having a better time against Mordor over here, but it's still going to be a costly engagement because of the Temple Executioners and the Nazgul and all the units they've killed already. Also, they are pretty far away from the town centre. Marshal Carandor still firing away. Wardens of the White Tower, are they still fighting that Nazgul? They are. This one Nazgul has been such a thorn in Gondor's side. The Ithilian Rangers getting poked and prodded by him as well. There you can see some Orc Archers who I think have returned from routing. For Mordor, it's all hands to the grindstone here. They just need to keep committing everything and keep trying to wear Gondor down and hope that Umbar can pull out the victory, I think. Because over here, Mordor are having the terms of the engagement dictated to them. They're still having to attack into Gondor's more prepared defence, whereas over here, Umbar seized the momentum. Crossbow Corsairs firing away. Only 2 marksmen of Caer Andros moving forward to try and support. And it could be that Umbar may very well turn out to be the MVP. It's a fight that's got such fine margins at this point. At some point the green arrow on the radar disappeared, so I'm going to assume that the troll catapult was unfortunately unceremoniously killed, and I mean there is a catapult here, so I think I can assume what happened to him. Got a little bit too close to the Gondorians and ended up paying the ultimate price. Defeat seems certain for the Minas Morgul chosen at this point. I mean, they're strong spears, but at this point they are being outclassed by the Gondorians. There's still Wardens of Minas Ithil in here who... Multiple HP Rangers, no slouches in melee. There go the Orc Archers routing once again. There's still Citadel Guard in there, depleted as they may be. Vanguard of King Elisar, depleted as they may be. And I think Gondor will get a victory here against Mordor, but I'm not sure they'll have enough left in the tank to take on Umbar. They've still got those Corsair crossbows, they've still got the Balakath Axe Guard. Harbinger's still in very good health as well. And Gondor's answer to this assault has been far too broken up, I think. Like, this one unit of Pelagia Marines, I think what they're trying to do is just delay Umbar from getting into the town centre, because if they do get into the town centre, of course, they're going to need to respond to it with something, and that means they're going to have to pull away from Mordor, which means even more losses on the part of Gondor, and I think that may very well, that I think will be the difference between the two sides here. But ultimately I think Gondor will be able to pull away here, because I think finally it looks as though Mordor have been dealt with, but this is a very skeleton crew with which they've got to defend Osgiliath now. Such a costly fight that it's been. Can't beat the classic map sometimes for a good exciting battle. This one Nazgul has just been giving these Wardens of the White Tower the business. At the very least though, the Wardens of the White Tower are strong enough that they aren't getting absolutely butchered by this one Nazgul. How embarrassing that would be. I'm pleased that my voice is at least held up, but here Umbar, coming in from left field with his quality, managing to hold back just enough to be a factor here in the late game. Harbingers, Corsair Fencers, Valakathak's Guard, who are going to have to try and stop those Rangers from firing. Gondor, meanwhile, are scrambling to just try and stop this, but I don't think Gondor have got anything that can match the Harbingers at this point. Such a strong unit to have in the late game. Ricky Beagle pacing himself just right, I think. And it could be that Umbar, Castamere would be proud that Osgiliath once again plays host to a massacre of unworthy Gondorians, I would imagine. But will it be? Will it truly be a victory for them? Valakathak's Guard killing off what's left of the Rangers, finishing off what's left of these infantrymen. And there you can see the Corsair Fencers using their throwing knives to finish off those pikes as well, to make sure they don't return from routing when they enter the settlement. And I think the fact that those crossbowmen are going to get into a really nasty position really is going to be, I think, what ultimately wins the battle for the attackers, which is crazy when you think of it. I mean, Gondor, they're not completely out of this, but I think just the advantage that Umbar has managed to secure for the attackers here is going to be too much based on what they have left. There go the Citadel Guard. Victory seems certain for the Harbingers of Castamere, unsurprisingly, finishing off what's left of the Pelagia Marines. An unworthy opponent for warriors of their stature. Valakathak's Guard trundling around in the TC. They'll be able to stop any advancing Gondorians. Can Gondor wrest control of the town centre back from Umbar? I mean, this is it. The final fight. It could still go either way, but I would probably back Umbar in this situation just because of the strength of their elites they still have. I did notice they still had a good 20 Vanguard of King Elisar, 17 Citadel Guard. That's not bad, but I think the advantage is with Umbar here. The Warns of Minister Thiel are here, the Valakathak's Guard. Let's not forget, of course, the crossbows. Even a couple of volleys could well and truly put this beyond Gondor, and Gondor see that. They're going to try and use the buildings for cover, but are these buildings actual entities that can be used? I think it looks like they are. And the Gondorians now seeing the volley and then using the gap between the reloads. That's very wise from the Gondorians, I must say. And the Warns of Minister Thiel managing to dodge through. But it's not going to matter too much, I think, because even through sheer numbers, there's one Citadel Guard getting shanked by the crossbows. The Warns of Minister Thiel are going to get jumped on by the Harbingers, but the Harbingers could really be best used on the front line. Corsair Fencers throwing into the Citadel Guard there. The fish scale type armour that the Corsair Fencers have. A very plain looking unit, but don't let that fool you. The Corsair Fencers very effective in melee as well. The Umbar answer to the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. Here come the Harbingers of Castamere, and this I think is going to be... They still have some ammunition, I think, down the way. Ooh, hello. No, they're routing. I thought that the Runic player was going to come to Umbar's aid there. The Marksmen of Karandros, even if they were, I don't think 4 Marksmen are going to be sufficient to truly turn this battle back around for Gondor, which is harsh on them, because I think Gondor played a very good battle, and you could say, of course, that the damage the Witchers did ultimately did turn out to be decisive, but you have to give some credit to the attackers as well, because ultimately they have won based on merit, as well as the power of some of their units, such as the Witchers. Corsair crossbows now in position. The Vanguard of King Elisar, yeah, there simply isn't enough of them to pull out the victory for Gondor here, unfortunately for them. And their brave effort will end in defeat. Oof. Skewered. Killing off more of these fencers at the very least. Of course, their crossbows in the background. Harbinger is actually just forming up into another line. I think we can go up to ×2 speed here because I think Umbar at this point are just savouring their victory, pulling their punches a little bit. Now they're charging in. And this surely will be the end of it. Surely the Gondorians aren't going to make this any more painful than it needs to be. And I say that, just under 2,000 frames left. Look at that, 99 to 100%, 1% in it. And ultimately the attackers just about going to be victorious. They're quite fortunate in a way, because I do feel as though, you know, without the witch, well, there goes the marksman. Brutally dispatched. Do they have anything left? Is there something down here? One trebuchet crewman. He is going to charge in, so an artillery crewman is going to be the last one left standing, I think, for the Gondorians. Where is he? Anything out here? There are well, there's 3 marksmen of Carandros, that's not really going to be enough. Ravenhelms, I mean, probably enough to admit defeat at this point. Certainly enough for me to go into ×6 speed, I think. But what a fight. Big thank you to Stu Barrow for sending this one to me. Good to see OSGILIATH, and like I said, I think that is the finest battle on OSGILIATH that I've ever shown. Lore-friendly as well, the Gondorians trying to hold on to what used to be the jewel of their kingdom, as Boromir put it, but ultimately not enough. And Ricky Beagle, I said he wasn't going to be MVP, and I jinxed myself, but I've got to give MVP for the attackers to him. Obviously, Irish Gunner using those witches ultimately did contribute greatly to the victory. I think he and Stu Barrog with their aggressive push also did, because I ultimately do feel as though Rune and Killeen's Mordor army were a little bit too passive and played into the defenders' hands a little bit. But I do got to give a lot of credit to the defenders. Wrestling with nearly 5,000 kills is very impressive after all. A lot of attackers though, to be fair. Let's have a look at what did the damage for the 2 Mordor armies. Killeen, a little bit too passive for my liking, but that's to be expected from a newer player. His Temple Executioners were still enough to get a lot of damage. That one Nazgul was probably responsible for most of those 63 kills, because of course he unfortunately got them charged early on. But over here, Shu Balrog, much more experienced player of course. Nazgul doing much better. The Bulldogs doing very well of course with their AP, as to be expected against a faction like Gondor. Olag High also doing very well for themselves. But Mordor were definitely just workhorse factions in this. Definitely Umbar and Angmar, I think, were the 2 who were mostly responsible for the victory, based on the Witches and based on Ricky Beagle just keeping enough back for the late game that he was able to take the town centre. So very well played to him, but well played to all the defenders as well. I think they played very well overall. So yeah, big thank you to Stu Bauer for sending this battle replay to me, because that was fantastic. Big thanks to all the players involved. As for the next battle I'm going to do, I'm not quite sure, because again, a lot of it is dictated when I can record these. Obviously, you know, the fact that I was able to squeeze in a very substantial battle was always a good thing, because these are always the most popular, especially on iconic maps like the Ruins of Osgiliath. But yeah, I'm not really sure what will be next. I'll try and get another big siege done if I can over the course of the weekend, but we'll see. Like I said, it's a little bit unpredictable with how things are at the minute, and I'm grateful to see that like a big scale battle like this didn't crash. So hopefully it is only an issue with certain new maps. Hopefully. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this. I did, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.